Okay, welcome everyone. Let's get started. My name is Joss Colchester. Thank you all for joining today, where we have a learning session with our London Hub. I'm the representative for the SI London Hub, and today we're going to be talking about systems modeling. I'm just collecting people here, but I think we're ready to get started. So this is maybe the fifth or the sixth in our series of training sessions on the systems innovation guides. You'll find them on our website. This is all the ideas and methods and tools for becoming a systems innovator. Hopefully some of you have been here for past sessions, some of you have been new. But here we are in maybe the sixth or seventh guide. I'm not sure exactly which one, but it's this one here on systems modeling. So you can find this guide. I'll share the link to the mirror board. We're going to be working there during today's session. So let me give you that. No, not that one. So when you come here, you'll find this guide here. And if you click on the link, you'll be able to go to it on the website. And afterwards, you'll be able to look further into that. What I'm presenting and we're talking about is just a kind of an overview to this. So if you want to read more, just click on that link there. It'll take you to the website. Also, we'll be working on a canvas today. We'll be doing a little workshop. You can see it down here for a lot of the sessions, so you get a sense of what this is about and how to use it. You can find that, the systems modeling canvas on the website also. You just click on that link there and off you go. Okay, so that's that. Today's session is going to be 1 hour. It is being live streamed on YouTube and therefore recorded for those who can't make it. So let's jump in and take a look at what we're talking about. What do we mean, model of a system? This is it here. It's a very general model, actually. It's quite abstract. It's really the idea of systems thinking and systems theory is that it actually applies to all kinds of systems in the universe. So it's inevitably going to be very high level, very abstract. But as we'll go through, I'll kind of point to you why this is of such value and why it's of such use to us. If we remember, we're in a series here, as mentioned, on systems innovation. So this is about how we do systems innovation. And the question then is, why would we want this? Why would we want to be looking at this model? And I'd say straight off, it's because it gives a very high level overview to the whole system that we're dealing with. Almost in one model, right? So it's very, zoomed out very far, and that has its disadvantages. We're not going to capture the details and so forth, but it has its advantages in that it's going to give us a holistic view of the whole system in some sense, as we'll see, as you'll see as we go through today. So this is it, the very general model. I'm going to kind of go into that in a minute as we walk through the canvas. But let's take a look at it kind of in practice here. So this is a really interesting little systems map, we call these. Actually, in our next session, in a month, we'll be talking about systems mapping. But this is the production of a cup of tea, right? It's a system. It takes a system to produce our cup of tea. And we can see there's a little guy, and he has his cup of tea there. And that's what this whole big complex system is all about, producing that cup of tea. And we can see on the left-hand side here, there are inputs, right? We know there's going to be certain inputs required to power this whole complex system so that he can get his cup of tea, or she. And on the other side, we can see there are outputs there, right? There's going to be, you can see as we go from the left, there's natural resources being inputted to the system here, water, forestry, oil for energy and transport and so forth. And on the right-hand side, we can see there are outputs, right? After he's had his cup of tea, he's going to throw away the tea bag. There's going to be some sewage, there's going to be wastewater, maybe even some energy wasted. And these are outputs from the system, both positive and negative, right? So this system, it's organized in a very particular way to serve this function. So it will serve a function of him or her getting their cup of tea. Just like Shirley, maybe Shirley's cup of tea. She's drinking one at the moment, I think. So there we go, a cup of tea. This is Shirley's cup of tea. And imagine all the work it took, right? So this big system, very complex system. We can see that there's energy, there's electricity, there's transport, there's obviously money, there's businesses, there's marketing, there's commerce, so on and so forth. There's people being employed to pick these tea leaves, whole system so that people can get their cups of tea. And that's the function of the system. And that's the thing we want from this system. But of course, it also produces waste. So those are the outputs, both positive and negative. And there's inputs to the system, and the system performs a function, right? All of this is performing a function. So this is it here, right? The model that kind of comes out of that. Inputs, a system, which is a set of elements which are interrelated in a particular way that enables them to function, right? So if you look at this, all these parts are organized in a particular way, right? They have to be interconnected. The tree, the wood's going to go into the factory there. That's ultimately going to create the packaging. The water treatment is going to come to the tap and so forth. So all these elements are interrelated and organized in a particular way. So that's what we see in here in the center. And as mentioned, this thing performs a function. We wouldn't be interested in it if it didn't. And if you think about all the systems we want to change in education, in healthcare, in finance, in food, we're interested in changing them. We care about them because they perform a function. And quite often we're believing that they aren't really serving that function very well. So one interesting aspect of this model also is for us to start thinking about the function of this system. We'll talk more about that as we go through, because I think it's a really important one, and have a discussion as a group about what's the function of this system, and what's a functional system, what's the productive outcome, right? So this here, it's quite clear. A productive outcome is our cup of tea. And, you know, there's obviously waste involved there. And that's quite clear. In other systems, it's not so clear. If it's an educational system or a political system or some other kind of system, healthcare, it might not be clear what is productive and what is kind of dysfunctional. So this here is going to help us think about that, have a discussion as a group. So the other aspects, we have the functional output. This is what we want from it, and have a dysfunctional output. And we also have, as you can see, a boundary, right? Systems have boundaries. Not always very clear where that boundary is. If it's a simple system, it will be clearer. This might just be a factory, one factory, and we know kind of where the limits are. It might be this thing here, and it's very difficult to say where the limits of this thing. It kind of sprawls probably all over the planet just to get that cup of tea. And this system exists within an environment. All systems exist within an environment. And that is the context that they form part of and the other systems that they interrelate and interact with. And all these systems are dependent upon their environment, right? This system here is not going to function without the input of resources and energy from the natural environment. And then it outputs resources back to them, or waste back to them. So hopefully we understand that. Anybody have a quick question, or are we generally happy? I'm sorry, we only have an hour, so we won't have a lot of time for questions, but I'll stay going. We have a couple of chat comments. Okay, great. A cup of coffee in Seattle. Okay. So let's stay going then. I hope you understand that concept there. As I said, it's a very general one. It's a very basic one. It applies to all systems in the universe. Interestingly, anything that's a system, you'll see this kind of a model, right? Whenever you have a system, it's a set of elements interrelated to perform a collective function, whether that's your body, whether it's the economy of whatever, London or Paris or somewhere, whether it's a water system, whether it's a farm, whether it's a little cell, right? This could be a biological cell. And all of them, they'll take inputs, they'll perform some function, and they'll create outputs. And they exist within an environment. They have a boundary. The cell, biological cell, has a boundary, has organelles, and they're interrelated in a particular way, takes in resources, performs a function, and outputs waste also. So There we go. But just stepping back a little bit, the section we're in this whole series of guides, we call systems analysis or systems inquiry. What we're doing here is systems analysis. We're trying to understand this system. And sometimes that's from a very high level, like this level here, and sometimes it can be in more detail. Next time we'll be talking about systems mapping, and that's often more detailed about the parts and the relationships between them. But generally, we're asking, how does this system work? Because we're interested in changing it. You definitely shouldn't be changing a system without understanding it first. So that's the whole point of systems analysis, systems mapping, and what we're doing here to get an understanding of this system. It's an attempt to understand and map out a given system in a comprehensive fashion, especially a complex system. What distinguishes it from other approaches to studying the workings of a system is that it's holistic, meaning that we're primarily concerned with giving a view of the overall workings of the system and the major relevant factors to be considered before starting. So we can see this is pretty comprehensive, pretty holistic, right? All the different parts of the system. And trying to get that bigger picture again. That's what systems thinking is about, trying to see the whole system and how all the parts interrelate. That's the power of systems mapping and systems modeling. And you can see how, you even see this idea of holism here, right? In our normal everyday kind of existence, we just, turn on the kettle and get our cup of tea, and we're not really interested in the system itself behind that. We just want our cup of tea. And we complain when our kettle breaks down or if there aren't any tea bags or something like this. But actually here, we're looking at it in a different way. We're looking at the whole system, which is interesting. I'll touch on that again, but it's this idea of trying to get away from problems and solutions to thinking about systems and seeing the whole system and how that whole thing works and how we might organize it or change the whole system. Talk more about that. So systems inquiry differs from systems thinking, which is a theoretical and abstract in nature, and different from systems change, which is about influencing a given system. It is instead about listening to the system to gain an understanding of how it works before we try to take any course of action. It's only from an unbiased observation of the current state of the system and an understanding of its evolution to this point that we may start to see pathways forward and how to work with the system's innate potential for change. So this is kind of a superpower of systems thinking. So if we understand the system, then we can really work with it. Instead of just coming along and, oh, I don't like this part, I don't like it that my cup of tea wasn't hot enough or whatever, and just seeing a problem and trying to find a quick fix solution, we're actually stepping back and trying to understand the whole system. And from that, have the potential to kind of work with it in a different way. And this aspect of listening to it is very important in a kind of an unbiased way, right? We need to actually just look at it and listen to it and say, what's going on here, right? Instead of trying to project our assumptions or our wants and desires onto the system. Okay, so that's a little bit about systems inquiry. We'll be talking about systems modeling, what we're doing today, and systems mapping next week. We'll talk about, be part of that. Why this approach? Firstly, it's a holistic view. Mapping helps us to view the system as a whole. So when I say mapping, I just mean really basic. What we see here, this is a systems map, right? It just has elements and then relationships between them. And this whole thing has a boundary and inputs and outputs. But it's just that thing of throwing up the elements and throwing up the relationships between them. That's what I mean when I say systems mapping. We'll look more at it next week. But it gives us a holistic view. It helps us analyze the structure of the system, as you saw. And the idea is that we do this together, right? As part of our systems change initiative, we're going to try and bring together different people in that system, and we're going to do this mapping together. And that's going to help us build a shared perspective, to create a shared visual diagram. Helps us to create a shared understanding of the system, right? Which is quite important. I'll talk about that again in a minute. And from that, we can get a course of action, right? If we have a shared understanding of what the system looks like, then we're in a much better place for us to come to consensus about a course of action and where we might intervene, where we may influence that system to try and see the changes we want to see. So those are some of the reasons why we do systems analysis and systems mapping. It's about understanding system structure. So systems inquiry is about trying to gain an understanding of how the system is, how it works, but not on a superficial level. So probably one of the first things you would have heard if you heard about systems thinking and systems change is that we're trying to get away from the kind of problem framing of things. That's how we kind of frame most things around here, kind of problems and solutions in systems thinking. We'll look at it in a minute. The iceberg model, we're trying to go down and really think about the structure of the system and how it emerges out of that. What's the actual system like? So we're trying to see the underlying structure rather than just the observable outcomes. By looking at the connections and linkages, we start to build up a view of the system structure. This helps us to start to understand how system structure creates the observable outcomes. We'll see that more in a minute. So Donella Meadows notes, starting with the behavior of the system directs one's thoughts to dynamic, not static analysis. Not only to what's wrong, but also how did we get there? What other behavior modes are possible? By looking at linkages and structure, we can start to see the system in a new way, not as a thing and what's wrong with those things, but instead in terms of dynamics, flows, and blockages. So it's a very different way of looking at the world and kind of framing what we're doing here. And as mentioned, it's about building up a shared understanding. Maps not only help us to gain an overall vision of the structure of a system, but also by creating them collectively, we start to come to a shared understanding. And as we go through that, we also negotiate our understanding of it, right? If this could be whatever, could be a food system, and there's many actors in that system, and they have different perspectives. And if you don't get them together and discuss that, it's difficult to reconcile them, right? We're all going to be going around with a different kind of vision of what this system looks like. And it's in that discussion, in that negotiation of how you see the system and I see the system and the other person sees it, that we can start to negotiate some consensus around what it looks like. And it's only really from that shared understanding of kind of the reality of what we're dealing with that we're ever going to be able to move forwards together in a sustainable way in terms of changing the system. That's what we're doing with this systems inquiry. Yeah, it's an objective reference point. The map becomes useful when individuals who experience the system day to day can see themselves and their challenges represented by the model. People start to see their actions in a new light and how they affect the whole. Once the causal links can be seen, they can be understood and discussed openly. This shared view of the system is a solid foundation for moving forwards. Okay. So this is a little graphic of it, right? In this world, we're quite often in this world, right? In politics, in our boardrooms and so forth, we don't have a view of the system. And one person thinks this, another person thinks that, and they don't have a shared understanding of it. So it's difficult to get consensus. And in this world where we have a shared representation, we can see what it looks like, and it's the grounds for collaboration and moving forwards. So I talked about this thing of trying to get away from problems. And a problem is an output to a system. If we look here, this here is the output to the system, and it's what we experience. It's like so many students. If we look at our educational system, and we might say, oh, this year 10% less students or 10% more students dropped out of school, and that's a problem. Right? It's an output to the system that we're measuring, and it's going in the wrong direction. So we call it a problem, and then we react to that quite often. We say, okay, what can we do about that? Let's find the most immediate thing we can do about it and try and fix that. That's very often what we do. We're trying to get away from that here and go kind of deeper in terms of looking at the actual interrelationships. So I've just represented a bit here. The problems are up here. So a problem is like a puncture. You get a puncture on your bike. The problems are the pain points that people experience and are thus motivated to try and fix. But underneath that is, of course, a function, as mentioned. Behind every problem is a societal function. And problems are really dysfunctionalities, right? It's the system's not functioning in the way that we want. And then if we go a step deeper, right, we saw that process, the function of the system. But of course, that function, that process is enabled by those elements working together. And that's the system structure. So behind the function of this bike, this system of mobility, is the actual bike itself. All these parts interrelated in a particular way, and that's the system. So functions are the products of ordered arrangement of elements in a system. So maybe you're seeing an analogy here. Maybe you've heard of this iceberg model and you're starting to see, well, maybe this is what he's talking about, right? How many people have heard of the iceberg model? Put your hands up. Maybe I can get an idea of that. Okay. Let's see. Okay, most people don't have their videos on. Okay, we've got lots of raised hands. Looks good. Great, great. Okay, so it's quite well known. So we have the events up here. It's kind of what I was getting to, right? The events are the observable actions and phenomena. These are the problems. Below those, we have patterns over time, how things are changing over time. Below that, we have the structure of the system. And below that, we have the mental models. So we'll talk more in the future about this iceberg model. We won't go into it today. We want to kind of focus on this systems model, but it's just to talk about, you know, why do we really care about this systems analysis stuff? Why do we really want to understand, why do we want to put so much energy into and time into trying to understand the system and its elements and so forth? It's because that's what this is all about. It's going to get us away from what's going on up here, which are just the parts and the output. What's going on down here is the structure of the system. And by understanding that, this is where the high leverage is, right? We'll talk about that later. The high leverage points are down here. So we have to actually understand the system structure before we're going to find those high leverage points and really be able to do systems change. So you can find the, the graphic there explaining the whole thing. We won't go into it now. What we want to do is jump in here. So we have our little model here, and hopefully you've joined me already on the board. I'll share the link again for those newcomers. What we're going to do is actually create a little model today. We're going to vote upon what system we want to choose. So please join me if you so wish on the mirror board. On the left-hand side here, you can see we have a number of systems, all right? So we have media and education and commerce and transport and water. Grab a dot and vote on which one you want us to work on today in terms of doing a little model. Maybe I'll go for cities. Okay, we've got two for healthcare, one for education. Society, some of these ones are a bit tricky. Society, right? It's quite abstract. We've got 2 for education, 2 for healthcare. We've got 3 for education. Okay, 3 for healthcare, I think, 4 for education. Okay, if we hit 5, anybody gets to 5, then they'll win. Okay, there we go, education it is. Great, so hopefully everyone knows how to use a mirror board. Looks like you do. If you don't, you just grab the icon for a sticky on the left and you place it down, and then maybe I'll scale it up a bit. And then you just type away. So that's that. Here's our model. We're talking about education. So it's an education system we're going to be working on for the next half an hour as an illustration of this. Of course, it is the model I just showed you before in terms of the input, process, output. the elements here, and we may have some interrelationships between them. And down here we have waste, or this is the functional output. So this is going to be an interesting conversation here around education. What do we consider a functional education system, right? I think this is really an important part of the question here and why we're using this model. Down here is a dysfunctional output, right? What's dysfunctional output to the system and the environment? What's the environment that it exists in? So let's start with inputs, right? What does an educational system take as inputs? Let's take a minute to jump in on that. If anybody needs help, just let me know. I'll share the mirror board again. Okay, let's take a look at some of these. So delivery method. Is delivery method an input? The way that they're delivering, I'd say that's part of the process, isn't it? That's part of the way they're going to do education, isn't it? Would you agree with me? So yeah, let me just explain again what I mean by process. What happens is the system takes in an input, right? So something comes in across its boundary, and it actually has a set of rules here about how it's going to change that input into some output. So there's simpler examples of that. If we take manufacturing, right? A factory is going to take in a lot of resources here, and then it has a certain set of processes, and they're very structured, and there's rules and so forth. There's basically an algorithm, you could call it, as to how it's going to turn this input into an output in the most effective way. Even if we took governance, right, or a political system, the function, what's the function of a political system? I would say it's to make decisions for for a collective group, whatever kind of scale that's on, a city or a nation or whatever. And again, so it has a function, right? It has to make decisions, and it has inputs, has information about the state of the system, and it knows what decisions it needs to make, right? There's some public money that needs allocating. How are we going to allocate that money? And of course, it doesn't do it randomly. It has a process or some algorithm, right? Set of rules. It says, we'll do it like this, and this many people can vote, and those people can vote, and they can't vote, and so forth. So that's the actual logic that guides this process, that defines, it could be the constitution or the laws or whatever it is. In that case, in a factory, obviously they're going to have, you know, manuals for the processes and so forth. So here, the delivery method is an example of that logic, isn't it? It's how this system is going to go about performing its function. Okay, so back here again, we've got lots of inputs. Curriculum. I'd say curriculum is part of the system, actually. Yes, I think you're putting lots of things here that should. Knowledge, yeah, it could be an input because this educational system exists in a society, and that society has a knowledge base from history. So, and that's obviously going to be an input to the system in some way. So I kind of agree with that. Students, I'd say they're elements of the system in some way. What I'd say here, the inputs are time and energy of children and adults who are going to do the teaching, right? So a lot of this stuff is labor market trends in some sense. Let's see, other funds. Yes, there's going to be money going into this system, right, from taxpayers and so forth. So that's definitely parents' time and energy, community time and energy is probably going to be this. These are inputs for sure. Standard tests, best practices. I'd say that's part of the system. A desire to know, understand. Interesting, that one, right? A certain motivation might be needed in this, a certain inquisitiveness and so forth. You might see that as an input. So, got to be careful what's what. I'd say a lot of these, the curriculum is probably part of this system, right? What would be an input is time and energy and money of the people who are employed to create that curriculum. That would be an input. School buildings, yep, physical resources, we might say, educational faculty, building, yeah, physical resources. Okay, educational theory. I'd probably put that, I might, yeah, could be somewhere, maybe on the boundary or something like this. Exams would be part of the system, they're not inputs. The time and energy to create them was. Shared beliefs, it's an interesting one. An educational system, all systems, right? So that's getting to the environment, isn't it, right? This educational system, it exists in an environment. And one of the main ones is nested within a broader cultural, social, political system. And so an input from that broader environment, that broader cultural system, is the shared beliefs of that society that are going to go into shaping how we operate and organize this whole education system. So it's a good one for sure. It's definitely going to shape what's going on here, and it's part of the broader context. Okay, so let's jump in then to some of the elements. We have the elements here in the system. Maybe you want to change, you want to grab some of the stuff you had out here and you think it's actually an element in the system. But if you come up with new ideas or any ideas, right? So again, this is thinking holistically. So you want to think about not just the obvious things. We want the economics here. Who's paying the bills? Who's storing the endowment for Harvard University? Where's that money actually going, right? That's important. Social, yeah, what culture, what society is this in? Is there politics involved? Technology, the internet, how do we store data? What are our information systems? Social media, obviously, things like this. Environments, yeah, could be things there. Where does this school exist? It's in a physical environment. Do the children get to play in a playground? Things like this. So let's take a few minutes to post up ideas and get the elements in the system. And you can also draw some connections, right? What are the relations if you come up with some of those? So please, let's jump into that. Take a few minutes. Okay, let's take a look at some of these, the elements in the system. So dress code. Yeah, interesting. Is that an element in the system, or it's more like part of the logic of the system, isn't it? You might say the uniforms that the students wear would be an element in the system, but maybe the dress code is kind of part of the logic here of the process, I would say. It's about protocols and rules. Yeah, so biases, interesting one. So this is coming from kind of societal, cultural context that this exists within. That might be part of the environment, right? I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Maybe we put it on the edges there. Maybe it's part of the culture and society. You know, obviously that's coming into the school, into the system from the broader society. So it may be an input almost, unless it's generated in some way inside the system. So curriculum, yes, body of content that we believe we have to transfer to these students. Access to basic nutrition, that could be an input to the system, right? Coming in, that's about its interaction with another system, a food system. So I'd say that's almost an input. An input, like these students, everybody's going to need food here, right? So food is an input, and access to basic nutrition is a factor relating to that input and a relationship between this system and another one, the food system. Taxation. Well, that's an input, isn't it? Right, money coming in. People aren't really getting. Well, I guess people are getting taxed in the system, yeah. But whether you're talking about, yeah, money coming in, or talking about the tax of the teachers and so forth. So it could be kind of both. Education theory, yeah, I think we have that as kind of an input. Transport, yeah, definitely. Moving, there's going to be school buses moving the children around, school districts. Yeah, so that's the way the system is organized, isn't it? It's part of the kind of paradigm here in the structure. Other funding. Well, there's definitely funding coming from somewhere. Alignment to standardized testing requirements, teaching to the test. Yeah, so this is it's the way the system is organized, the set of rules and so forth. Maybe it's best we have that up in social, because this is about the rules. Students after school programs. Yep, grades, ranking, grading, promotion. That's, yeah, some of these are interesting, right? Is ranking, grading, promotion, is that an element in the system? Or maybe it's a way that we're assessing outputs, isn't it? That's what I would say it might be. See, it's tricky, this, figuring out what goes where. The internet, yes. Difficult to know where that goes. It's something, it's obviously, well, this whole thing exists within an information environment. So maybe if we're talking about the whole internet, that might be the environment or the context. And then within this system, yeah, that's going to show up in different ways in terms of computers in schools and so forth. Tech policies. So I'd put that up in social, right? All the stuff around politics and policy and so forth. Teaching methods, desire to rank students. Yeah, that's a cultural mental model. Often put that up with culture. All this social stuff often kind of just have culture, social structures, and political regulation all together up there. Politics, yeah. Assessment, yeah. That's going to affect the outcome, all right. Economic inequality. Yeah, that's almost an environmental thing, isn't it? Again, this system exists within an environment and is going to be conditioned by the economic situation. So that's almost like an input or, yeah, something from the environment, really. honors versus non-honors tracks affect mindset. Yeah. Okay, self-learning. Yeah, technology. Self-learning is almost like an approach to learning, isn't it? It's almost a method instead of using the schooling method where you go to the classroom and you follow that curriculum and teacher. So it's almost like part of this process. So let's maybe jump into that process. What do we think the process is here? What can we say about the process that's going on here? Maybe some more of this logic and so forth here, maybe what we're looking for. Let's jump into that. It's essentially, how do we get from the input? How do we get the things that we're wanting to get, right? How do we actually, educate these children in some way? Let's try posting up a few of them. Oh, two people have their hands up. Was that from before, or did you want to say something? Okay. So what can we say about the process of learning or the method that we're using? This is obviously critical to the whole system, isn't it? It's the kind of logic that this thing's going to be governed by. It's going to affect the whole thing. There's, for example, a lot of this is kind of process is based around age, isn't it? Age-based progression. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So hopefully you get the idea of this process. What's the way that we're going to take the inputs and change them in some way to the outputs? And what's the actual method? What's the set of rules through which we do that? Like a chef, right? Takes in ingredients, has a recipe. It's a bit like a recipe, going to turn those ingredients into the desirable things, right? So that's what we have here, the functional output. What is the functional output of this thing? So we're getting interesting questions here now because it's starting to get a bit subjective. If you had a large group of people, this was a group of people in the US educational system, and you got them together, they would have quite different perspectives on this, So we can start to have a good conversation about what is the point of this system? Why are we doing all this? Let's give that a try. What is the desirable function of this system?
Hola bebé, hola bebita.
Okay, let's take a look at some of these. So the functional output to this educational system. Employable people, right? Entrepreneurs, graduates equipped with 21st century skills. Raise education level in society. Higher earning tax base. Drive human progress. College acceptance. Contributing citizens. Student graduates. Fit for specific functions. And it's kind of getting at like this system and its relationship to other systems, isn't it? Like, what context are we looking at this in? Are we looking at it in kind of a social context? Not sure if anyone put it here, but we might have like educated citizens who are able to make informed decisions so that we can govern ourselves in an effective way. That would be one. Someone's obviously economics is involved here. Social status is involved too. Getting a graduation, getting a PhD and so forth. Contributing citizens, US racial segregation. To have a degree. Supply economy with workers. Yep, US teachers to the test. US teaching to the test. Social control. Yes, indeed, it's definitely part of it throughout history. Educational systems have been a means of one generation controlling another, the younger generation. Education is a social institution reproducing existing power relations. Yep. Well-being human and more than human. Yep. Access to jobs. Okay. Very good. So those are examples of functional outputs, and we can start to see some of the diversity there, right? The different perspectives on this. And if we did have a group of people here, that would be a very fruitful conversation in terms of us trying to get on the same page about, why are we doing it? What's the function of this system? If we can't agree what the function is, it's going to be difficult to ever actually, organize the system really in a very productive way. We're going to have inside here, we're going to continuously be bumping up against each other on different opinions about things because we've got different opinions about what this thing should really be doing. So part of what we're doing here as a group is getting everything outside of our head, right? That's part of the whole mapping exercise. We go up here again, we can see these guys are in a much better situation because they can look at the wall and they can see what everyone else was thinking and they can see what's in people's heads, right? Here, you don't know what's in everyone's heads. You just state your opinion and they state theirs. Okay. So down here, what's a dysfunctional output? Let's take a few minutes to do that. We're coming near the end of time, but let's take a little bit. Someone's already started. Let's try just post up a few more in a minute or two. This is often called waste, or what's the negative externality, right? We often complain about, well, some people about, kind of dumbing down the intellect of students or how bored they are in school, or they, children go in with a lot of creativity, but they come out, lacking that. So that could be a negative externality of our approach where we impose a curriculum on them and don't really, enable them to actually pursue their interests and creativity and so forth. That could be a negative externality, losing creativity and so forth. Okay, let's take a look at this. So career students never finished, continuously trying to climb the ladder or something like this. I mentioned dropouts. Yeah, people for which this system didn't fit very well, right? It works for some people, but for others, they're just not suited to it, even though they may be very intelligent. You know, all these Einstein and Mark Zuckerbergs who end up dropping out of college. So that could be a negative externality, that we have a system that doesn't really enable people and bring out the best in them, and actually they end up hitting up against the structure of the system and it's not working for them. That could be a negative, and dropping out, and that could be a negative externality. Teacher attrition. Yep, teachers maybe don't like this either. If we had a dysfunctional system here, not a very good process or set of logic around how it should, delivery methods and so forth, or not getting sufficient pay. If the system was not working well, then we would get an output, a dysfunctional output, where we can't attract enough good teachers and they want to drop out. Lost potential. Yeah, I think that's a lot of what we're getting at. We're putting in a lot of resources over here, right? All our young people, all this taxpayers' money, all this time and energy, and all their motivation and ambition and hopes and so forth. And maybe a lot of that is ending up on the rubbish dump because of the way this system is organized, right? That's definitely a dysfunctional negative externality. Social gaps, yeah, so this system could, the way it's organized, if, like a system where you've got to pay a lot of money if you want to get into good universities, that can perpetuate and even create more social gaps. So that would be a dysfunctionality. Create technology that makes needed education more high level. Massive student debt, yeah, for sure. Losing self-confidence. Conformist, lack of critical thinking, for sure. And these are things that, these are things we hear about our educational system, our industrial age education, that they're negative externalities. Okay, so antisocial dropouts, teacher attrition, okay, lost potential, conformists, massive student deaths, loss, those are good ones. I think you captured a lot of interesting ones there. Higher education is social economic signaling. Education as a social institution responsible, reproduces existing power relations. Okay, and finally, let's think a bit about the environment, right? The system exists within the environment, within an environment. What do we think that environment, we've kind of touched upon a little bit, what do we think some of those elements in that environment are, right? So we've got broader social and cultural factors. It's interacting with many different systems, but just to put that up, to start kind of becoming aware of that. What are the, yeah, it's good to think about what does this system depend upon to actually exist? I'd say maybe these kind of cultural factors, this kind of paradigm is a big one, right? The underlying assumptions that go into how we construct this, like biases here, politics, a political system, it depends upon a political system, depends upon a whole technology infrastructure, right, of communications, the internet is embedded within that for sure. It's embedded within the whole labor workforce employment system of a nation and the public sector, all these people, teachers working in the public sector. Yeah, there's a whole pile of things in this environment, factors and states of the environment, 21st century context. I guess you're almost getting at like this thing exists within a whole civilization, right? And that civilization is at a particular place in time and development, like the industrial age. We know is there's underlining kind of infrastructure of ideas and thinking, but also the whole context of the industrial age that really supported that education system we knew in the past. So that was the kind of 20th or 19th century context. And now this thing exists within a whole new context. And quite quickly, we're waking up to the fact that it's not really fit for purpose in this new, broader new environment. So global pandemic, yeah. So this is a health context. These people have to be healthy really for this thing to work. So that's something we might not think about straight away. It's part of the whole health system, part of the whole demographics, right? That's an important factor here. Remember, we're thinking holistically, and we want to get all the different factors out here. We also call this giga mapping, where we just try and put everything up there to try and see everything, you know? So you think about demographics is going to be a big part of this. How many children are there here? Is this a younger population? You know, is this developing economy or a developed economy with a lot of older people versus young people and so on? Increasingly globalized, connected worlds, complexity, yep. Inequality, yeah, so these are factors that are going to feed in economic and social factors that are feeding into this funding, organization, teachers, students. Teachers, students are part of the system, I would say. Okay. So there we have it, guys. Let's step back and take a look at that. I hope you're grasping this kind of concept of holism here and how it's really giving us this zoomed out picture of the whole thing, right? The inputs, the elements in the system. When we start mapping it in the next section, we'll start thinking about what are the relationships between them? What's the causal relationships between the different parts? But we talked about, you know, what's a good system, what's a functional one, what's the dysfunctional one, and zooming out to actually see the whole context that this thing exists within. Quite often when we think about education, we'll zoom in. An analytical approach would zoom inside the system and kind of look at what's going on there. A more systems approach would zoom outwards and say, what's going on in this broader context, right? We've got changes going on here, and that's going to affect the inputs of the system and the whole context that exists within. And it also affects, as we talked about, what we consider good and not so good, right? That's relative to the environment. The kind of outcomes we want from this system will be relative to the whole context it exists in. Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful, and we'll leave it there for now. We've come to the end of the hour. Next week, we actually, I posted next month's event, systems mapping as promised. So it's really a continuation of what we're doing here, systems inquiry and systems analysis, thinking about the relationships and the causal interrelationships between different factors in the system. So we'll come back next month and take a look at that. You can click on this here and it'll take you right there. It'll take you to that next event and you can sign up. You'll also find it on the community site, and you can join again next month when we continue our systems analysis, systems inquiry, understanding complex systems so that we have much better capacity to collectively change them. We're in this world here instead of this one. This one here, when it comes to changing systems, we end up like the Security Council at the United Nations or something, kind of stalled. Everybody having their own perspective, everyone having their own incentives and so forth, and there's no shared understanding. It's very difficult to move and do stuff in that world. In this world, you really want to be in this one because it's the world where you can collectively start to try and change the system together. So that's why we're doing this, and we'll continue next month. I hope that was of help, and I hope to see you all next time.